Hi, I'm Justin Stefani with COMPKART, and here today we're going to go over how to disassemble and reassemble your axle. Okay, so the first thing when disassembling your axle is you're going to want to remove all of your exterior hubs. That includes your wheel hubs and your sprocket hub. So first we'll start with the wheel hub. Loosen that with a 6mm Allen. Should just slide right off. That slides off. You can rotate the axle. Your axle key will come out. And then now we're on to the sprocket hub. Whether you have your sprocket actually affixed to the hub or not, one thing that's important is make sure you loosen the bolts. This is going to reduce any bind from when you loosen the hub to slide the hub off. It'll make it tremendously easier. So we do the same thing with our 6mm Allen. We have the bolts loose, and now we'll notice key came out, how easy the hub slides off. Very simple when you take your time. Now that we've successfully removed the exterior hubs, wheel and sprocket, now we're going to go to the interior hub and prepare that for the disassembly process. Two things that we need to do here is loosen the hub that actually the rotor physically mounts to, but the fixing bolt and nut combinations that actually hold the rotor to that hub, those need to be loosened as well, much like we did on the sprocket hub. That will reduce any bind and allow the axle to come out freely. So here we'll grab our 5mm and our 10mm. We'll loosen the bolts that the rotor are affixed to. That's complete, and now we'll actually loosen the physical bolt that holds the hub down to the axle. And that's complete. Okay, now we've successfully removed all of the hubs. We've prepared and loosened the brake hub and brake rotor. Now it's time to remove the set screws that actually fix the axle to the bearing. So there are 3 set screws on the outside of each bearing, so we'll remove those with a 4mm Allen. Make sure to put your set screws somewhere where you know you're going to find them. They're small and black, so they're easy to disappear. Okay, now we've removed all 6 set screws from the axle. Okay, now we've removed our 6 total set screws, 3 from each side. There's 2 more remaining tools that we need to complete the job. One is going to be a small file. The other is going to be a rubberized hammer or dead blow hammer. We'll use the rubberized hammer to gently knock the axle away from the brake side in order to get the set screw marks, which have been impregnated into the axle, just outside of the bearing. Once it's just outside of the bearing, then we'll take our small file and we'll actually file those down, especially important on this side as to when we move the axle all the way through the other 2 bearings, they don't mark up the inside of the bearing, mark up your axle, and this is oftentimes a common occurrence and can basically ruin the inside of your bearing and ruin the axle. Okay, now we've successfully filed down our set screw impressions into the axle. We've taken our dead blow hammer, we've lightly tapped the axle towards the engine side of the chassis. Now, with everything being loose, we should just be able to simply pull the axle out with no difficulties. So we'll grab the hub, spin the axle here, we've got the brake disc out. Once that's out, another thing that you're going to want to do, you don't always have to do it, but sometimes it's a good idea to crack your 3rd bearing loose. A lot of people don't run it, period, but if you are, it does help if this is loose when you go to slide the axle out. So from here, the axle should come out pretty effortlessly. And now we've removed our axles successfully without doing any harm to our bearings or our axle. Okay, so now we're going to reinstall the axle that we just took out. The first thing that you'll notice is that the third bearing has been removed. In order to get the proper alignment of the axle, it's best to start with your outside two bearings. Work your axle through from one side, then depending on how that goes, you may have to work it back in from the other side to get the correct alignment on the bearings. So we'll start from the engine side first. Slide the axle through, and as we go to push it in, it feels a little bit tight. So you shouldn't force your axle through. If it's tight, that basically should mean typically a misalignment. It could also mean a burr on the end of the axle. But since we filed this axle, we know there's no burr. So what we're going to do, instead of forcing it, we're going to actually pull it back out, and then we're going to come in through the other side. Okay, right before it meets up. We can tell that it's still misaligned, so just lean on the axle a little bit and try to get the bearing on the brake side to align itself a little bit better. That there looks about right. Feels free. Let's see what we have. Okay, now that our axle is aligned, we're going to reinstall the third bearing. Pretty simple, drop it in. Now we have to install our brake hub. We don't want to forget that. This is also the spot if you're running an external water pump, you don't want to forget to put your water pump belts on the axle. So slide that through the brake hub. Now that we have the axle fitted, brake rotor, we didn't forget our keyway. The next thing you need to do is make sure that the axle is centered in the chassis. So you want to take a measurement from the outside of the cassette to the outside of the axle. That measurement should be equal on both sides. Luckily for us, this axle we're putting back in, so it has the set screw marks from the first time. So another good way to do it is just line those set screw marks up and reuse them, and then put your set screws in. And once that's completed, your axle is fixed. Okay, we successfully mounted the axle back in the chassis after removing it. I went ahead and fixed our external hubs. So it's been a pretty successful job, pretty quick job. A few points to remember when doing it is, first and foremost, take your time, but also make sure you loosen the proper items on the axle. First thing is loosen your sprocket hub bolts if you have a sprocket hub affixed to it. Crack loose your third bearing bolts, and loosen the actual nut and bolt combination that holds your rotor to the hub. If you do that, it's going to make the job significantly easier. And the last tip is make sure to have a small file, and once you begin to remove the axle from the chassis, file your set screw marks. That's going to save your axle and save the inside of the bearings and make reinstallation that much easier. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.